I'm going to start by opening the file passed into the arguments of my program using fopen. So let's open the docs for this. And you can see that it gets a path name and a mode. So I'm going to wrap this with my main entry point function. And I'll get the argument count and the arguments themselves. argv. Now I'm going to pass into fopen the path name, which will come from the arguments. And I'm going to pass a mode. You can see we have a couple of options for mode. I'm going to start by just reading the file, so I'm going to pass R over here. And I'm going to save this into a file pointer. Also, let's add the include file required according to the man page. Before continuing on, I'm going to remind that this code is just for fun and definitely not for production. I'm going to skip a lot of error checking, and I'm going to assume everything is successful. After opening up the file with fopen, I want to actually read the contents. So for this, I'm going to use fread. You can see that this gets a couple of parameters. First one is going to be a pointer to save the actual contents of the file. Then we have size and the number of members. And finally, we have the stream. So this is going to be the actual file. I'm going to define the buffer right away. The size is going to be 1, and the number of members is going to be 1024. And I'm going to pass the file right over here. Now let's go ahead and define the buffer. I'm going to use an inside char for this. Now let's go to the section in fread manual page that actually talks about the return value. And you can see that when it's successful, it actually returns a number of items read or written. So that's why I actually used 1 in the size and 1024 in the items. As you can see, if you continue reading here, this number equals the number of bytes transferred only when size is 1. So now I can save the actual number of bytes that were actually read. Now I'm going to define a helper function that will actually help me print the hex. What I'm going to do in this function is I'm going to loop through the buffer, and the loop is going to occur num times. For each time the loop occurs, I'm going to print the actual hexadecimal value of the current byte. So for this, I'm going to open the manual page of printf. Notice I'm specifying 3 over here. That means I want to use the third section of the man pages. This is a section that talks about library calls. I'm using this explicitly right over here because I don't want it to confuse the command printf. Specifically, I want to search for hex because I want to get to the section that talks about how can I print hex values. And you can see that I can use the letter X over here. I can use capital X. And you can see that when I use capital X, I get the uppercase letters. That's exactly what I want to use. Another important thing I want to specify over here is I want to change the precision of the number. So the default precision, as you can see, is 1. That means that if my hex value only has the letter A, for example, then it's just going to print the letter A, but I want it to print 0A. So in that case, I'm going to go up again in my manual page. And we're going to navigate to the section that talks about the syntax. And you can see that before actually specifying the conversion, which is the X over here, you can see I can specify a dot and then a precision. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's finish off by printing a new line over here. And also let's print a new line every 10 values. Another important thing, I'm going to add a space over here so it'll be more readable. Now let's go ahead and use this function right over here. After calling this function, it's going to print the contents of the file in hex format. By the way, notice that we're limiting this to only work with the first 1024 bytes of the file. Now let's start getting commands from the user. So I'm going to make an infinite loop over here. And I'm going to use 2 variables. First one is just going to be a character. So I'm just going to call this command. And the second one is going to be an integer. I'm just going to call this location. Now I'm going to use the scanf function. So let's open the documentation. First argument is going to be the format. So the format is going to get a character and then a number. And I'm going to pass the variables right over here. Let's go ahead and move the code to the left side. Now I'm going to start by implementing the print command. So let's check if cmd is p. And if so, I'm going to call printx. First argument is going to be buffer plus location. And second one is going to be 10. So in the case the user wants to use the print command, it's just going to supply a location in the buffer, and then it's going to print 10 bytes from that location. Second command I want to implement is going to be the edit command. In the case of editing, I want to use scanf again, so I'm going to call scanf. And I'm going to get an input of a hex value, and I'm going to pass in the buffer plus location. Last command is going to be save. And this will just break from the loop. Finally, let's go ahead and implement how it's going to actually save the contents to the file back. So I'm going to open the file again. For that, I'm going to actually close it. I'm going to use fclose for this. So I'm going to start by closing F, and then I'm going to open again. But this time I'm going to open the file in write mode. Let's go ahead to the section that talks about modes. I'm going to use W for write. This is going to truncate the file to 0 length or create a new file. Now let's go ahead and use fwrite. Now let's pass in the size. Number of members 1024, and the stream is going to be F. Finally, we can go ahead and close this file. Now let's go ahead and try this out. So I'm going to save this code. Let's compile this with GCC. I forgot to include stdbool.h. Let's go ahead and include this. Another additional fix I want to make is to actually move this to be before the print. That way it's not going to cut the first hex line. Now let's go ahead and save this, and I'm going to compile this. Now let's go ahead and download google.com, for example, wget. And now I'm going to open this index file with my hex editor. You can see that it starts by listing the contents in hexadecimal values. Let's try the print function. So I'm going to print, for example, from location 2. You can see that works nicely. Print from 0 works as well. You can see the 64 right over here. Now let's try the edit functionality. So I'm going to use edit, for example, from location 0. Now let's change 3C to be, for example, 3D. Now let's print 0. And you can see that works nicely. And the reason it's actually putting zeros over here is because when it's using scanf to actually get the value, it gets the value as a 4-byte number. Now let's go ahead and save this with the S command. By the way, it's still not quitting because it's expecting another number, so I'm just going to pass 0 here, for example. And now if I take a look on the file with hexdump, for example, you can see that the change that we made indeed worked. By the way, another interesting thing to notice on the editor, let's open it again, for example, on the same file. If I go ahead and edit, for example, say location 2, and I just put the number, let's say AA, BB, CC, and DD. Now let's print 0. And you can see that bytes are actually ordered opposite than what you initially expect. So that's an interesting thing to note. Subscribe for more programming videos, and thanks for watching.